One of the most common arguments that evolutionists use to debunk the claim that no random mutation can increase genetic information or create novel biological traits is gene duplication. It is a genetic process in which a mutation copies a strand of DNA segments into one or more duplicates of nucleotide-based sequences. Neo-Darwinists claim that this process creates new genetic information. However, is there really any truth to this claim? The real answer behind the question is yes, but mostly no. And I will explain why that is the case using various arguments. The claim that gene duplication itself is an increase of genetic information is actually false. Gene duplication itself is not an increase of genetic information. Suppose I have a newspaper and I duplicated it. Would there be any new information by duplicating the newspaper? Of course not. Why? Because you are copying the same information all over again. It doesn't matter how many times you copy the newspaper, it's not going to generate anything new. So this is the reason why gene duplication itself cannot increase genetic information. Now, the second dilemma against the claim that gene duplication increases genetic information is the fact that the majority of all gene duplicates result into useless pseudogenes by deleterious mutations. In genetics, when a gene duplicate gets naturally selected by natural selection and used as a backup, it will be silenced by a deleterious mutation when the gene duplicate is no longer needed. Now, this fatal rate happens among the majority of gene duplicates, resulting useless for evolution. The only way the gene duplicate can survive from being deleted is by not having been selected by natural selection. However, the probability of this happening is extremely low. That is why the majority of gene duplicates get deleted and result into pseudogenes that have no function at all for evolution to work. Now, another way a gene duplicate can survive without being corrupted is by using DNA methylation. However, that too is also unlikely. So what does this mean? It means that the majority of gene duplicates result into useless pseudogenes that do not increase genetic information due to deleterious mutations by natural selection. However, the fact that the gene duplicate survival rate is extremely tiny doesn't necessarily mean that it is impossible for new genetic information to arise. There are gene duplicates that do survive from being deleted, and they do result into a function. However, the question of whether or not the function is new or the same thing is something to consider about. In genetics, there are two distinctions of functional gene duplication. One is subfunctionalization, and the other one is neo-functionalization. Subfunctionalization is a process in which two or more duplicated genes that diverge from its parent gene performs the same function as its parent. However, it is divided for each duplicated gene. In other words, if a parental gene had the function A and B, in subfunctionalization, the duplicated genes would perform A and B exactly as its parental gene. In subfunctionalization, there is no new genetic information because the duplicated genes are performing the same function as its parent. Subfunctionalization is rather redundant and repetitive rather than being useful for evolution, as the neo-Darwinists want you to believe. Neo-functionalization, on the other hand, is a process in which the duplicated genes do perform new functions that its parent did not perform before. In this process, there is an increase of genetic information, and therefore in favor of the neo-Darwinian claim that gene duplication increases genetic information. However, how common is neo-functionalization as opposed to subfunctionalization? In the peer-reviewed journal article questioning the ubiquity of neo-functionalization, published by Todd A. Gibson and Deborah S. Goldberg on January 2, 2009, addresses that question. According to the author, molecular evolution studies have shown that the redundancy intrinsic to gene duplication may allow one gene duplicate to acquire a new function, neo-functionalization, or both duplicates to each assume a subset of the ancestral gene's function, subfunctionalization. Studies of networks of interacting proteins and models of evolving protein interaction networks have shown that both subfunctionalization and neo-functionalization are widespread in protein evolution. Here we present evidence that shows that the methods and models that have established neo-functionalization as ubiquitous force in protein interaction network evolution are flawed, and under re-examination support subfunctionalization, not neo-functionalization. We start by reviewing the methods and models that engender prolific subfunctionalization and neo-functionalization in evolution. We then critically approach neo-functionalization. We show that biases in protein interaction assays, failure to consider concurrent and subsequent gene duplications in evolutionary inferences, and an inability of theoretical models to reproduce empirical clustering have all led to neo-functionalization being erroneously identified as a pervasive force in evolution. In this article, the article criticizes neo-functionalization as being a ubiquitous and practically significant force for evolution. The reason why is because neo-functionalization is extremely rare compared to subfunctionalization, meaning that the majority of the gene duplicates that survive actually result most of the time or always in subfunctionalization as opposed to neo-functionalization. Important point to keep here is that the article is not saying that neo-functionalization doesn't exist. Instead, he's saying that neo-functionalization cannot be considered ubiquitous, in other words, everywhere, and also practically significant for evolution, meaning that even if neo-functionalization is real, it cannot be practically significant for evolution because it will count probably in a very minority of species as compared to all the species. Therefore, gene duplication cannot be considered a significant force that accounts for all the species observed in life. The effect of neo-functionalization by gene duplication is so low that it doesn't even matter. It is insignificant, which is an excellent reason why gene duplication nearly 100% of the time does not increase genetic information. So much for the evolutionary fairytale claim that gene duplication drives evolution when it extremely hardly does. Now, before I close this presentation, I would first like to clarify something. Neo-Darwinists will tell you that random mutations increase genetic information. Now, even though gene duplication can increase genetic information, even though it's practically insignificant, is it really random? Actually, no. Gene duplication by neo-functionalization is not random. It is actually the greatest example of cellular genetic engineering. The genetic information made by the gene duplicate is actually made by a targeted mutation. James A. Shapiro, an expert geneticist and a non-believer in neo-Darwinism, or the monothesis of evolution, which is the belief that everything we see in life is the result of natural selection and random mutations, describes gene duplication as a natural genetic engineering by the cell. The cell, according to him, is capable of genetically engineering in response to environmental stimuli. In other words, the cell is capable of non-randomly generating DNA novelties by manipulating the genome sequence structures of the DNA, as if the cell was intelligent and knew what it was doing. In other words, according to James Shapiro, gene duplication is a goal-oriented response. It is not a random process, as the neo-Darwinists want you to believe. So, in other words, gene duplication is not a random mutation, but rather a non-random mutation that is directed and targeted under cellular control. So much for that neo-Darwinian claim that random mutations create new genetic information. Alright guys, well that's the end of my presentation, and if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know in the comment section below, and if you agree, please leave a like, and thanks for watching.